Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Bilateral View. This is Arup K. Chatterjee, and with me here is Dr. Rhodora Magan, our Filipino public intellectual for today's discussion. And Dr. Magan is also the author of the wonderful book Purposive Communication, apart from her work of fiction, Albatross. But it is the first book that we are going to talk about today, especially in relation to NVCs. Dr. Magan, I think our viewers would like to know what are NVCs and how have you been?
Professor Chatterjee, body language is very important. Everything we do with our shoulders, our eyes, our nose, our mouth, the hair, okay? Every time we flip it, and of course, for the guys, every time they stroke their hair, there's always meaning to that. Even today, as we speak, we have a lot of things to, of course, to warn ourselves with. Perhaps you're so unconscious with so many things that we do in the podcast. So, yeah, everything's fine. I feel so wonderful. I thought that you're doing the same thing.
Thank you so much. You have already provided us a synonym about NVCs. You didn't explain to our viewers what that acronym stands for, but you said it probably means something to the effect of body language. Now, there was a very historic event that was conducted last week, and we got to know the results of it. That is the American election results. And while I think Dr. Magan, it is an unstated policy in bilateral view that we do not discuss. We intend not to discuss political matters in a politicized way. We do not intend to discuss matters of religious sensitivity in a insensitive way. But I think what we can certainly do as scholarly viewers. I mean, you're the scholar in this case, and you're also a practitioner of what you have termed as purposive communication. So what we can certainly do is to try and see in what aspects can we, if possible, analyze the American elections for whether you call it body language or NVCs. So, do you think it is even within our purview to start discussing the leading candidates that we've seen this election season?
That's a wonderful question, Professor Chatterjee. Asking that question means asking a human being to actually verify whether or not a body language is universal. I mean, there's a lot of talk about body language, and whether you are white, yellow, or blue, or red for that matter, we speak the same language. And uh, yeah, of course, if you're a human being, you can talk about whether or not your body cues are consistent with formality or informality. And anyone can assert the idea. And right now, I argue that, well, it is under one's purview to really reason whether or not the kind of cues he's doing with his body are appropriate. And we don't want to hurt other cultures, right? So there's this ideology that whatever we do with our bodies, it has to be um, collectively conveying the message of a good and behaved manner in such a way that there is no one to feel isolated. Because there are a lot of gestures we do on a daily basis that would make someone feel hurt or would make someone feel that he or she is not part of the group. So, yes, we are entitled to say something about the body language, and it varies from culture to culture. Whether you're in doubt, for example, of whether or not you have the capacity to extend the conversation, I think it's high time to shun that doubt because to freely express yourself is to be human and to share your thoughts on the subject, so long as it is backed up by, of course, relevant evidences. Pertinent to your culture, there's nothing wrong with that.
In what respects do you think we can start considering to analyze the body language? Because again, I would like to reiterate my question. We are still not explaining what you meant by NVCs when we spoke before this podcast in the backdrop. So I think our viewers would like to understand what NVCs are, and how they can be more conscious of it, and in what respects can we start analyzing the NVCs of, whether at all we can, of the leading candidates of the US election.
Okay, earlier I went straight with body language, and yes, you're right. You have to go into the details. And VCs, nonverbal cues. These are the these are the ideas we convey to people, meaningful ideas that do not come with words. They are done accordingly. Okay, you have your expression in the face, and that can convey something. You have to position your body this way or that way. It has another meaning, or from one position to another, or from one location to another. That's body movement. That's another thing that conveys meaning. Um, the way you utter the words and the tone reflected there, that's another realm to be investigated, because it adds layer to the meaning you convey. Very specifically, Kamala Harris's tone during the speech that she did to concede to Trump, and that's something we're talking about in a while. Um, Everything that does not come with words, they all fall under the category of nonverbal cues. And again, they are very essential in the conversation because they complement the kind of emotion. And the person you are sharing this idea with that particular emotion generated from the nonverbal cues, is more clarified. And there's understanding. At the end of the day, in communication, the main goal is understanding. Um, when do we start talking about this? In what respect, for example? Well, I think it boils down to the most relevant thing in society. We talk about NVCs in relation to, say, the Trump Harris competition and the recently concluded what platform in the US. America chose their president a couple of hours ago. And that's something that we can use to start talking about NVCs because it is global. It resonates with so many cultures. And say, if you're the president of the US, for example, whatever you do behind the platform, that is parsed 1 million times over. And I think everyone deserves to know what these gestures are, especially when we talk about Trump. And of course, Kamala being the tough competition of Trump, because we're talking about binaries here, the male and the female. And despite there being different in terms of the sex, or yeah, in terms of their orientation, they are running for the same position. So that reference point, Professor Chatterjee, is beautiful to begin with when we talk about nonverbal cues on a global scale.
I think this is going into some interesting directions now. So I would be, rather straight and very pointed if you do not mind too much, Dr. Magan, because I think we have a lot to learn from you today. So if you can pardon my nonverbal cues, for example, because I'm going to be very, very, um, straightforward in my questions, because while I think it's important to distinguish that the field that we are talking about is a real life field, whereas we are going to discuss it in a rather academic, scholarly way. But you being both a theorist and a practitioner, I think could help us bridge that gap. And you're also a Filipino public intellectual. So you are not merely an academic when it comes to nonverbal cues or body language. I'm guessing you are also equally influenced by your studies, your observations in Filipino society's nonverbal cues, and you are also a very well traveled person. So you have the exposure in the NVCs of various cultures, as you rightly suggested. Uh, Certainly, there aren't 100% overlaps in all NVCs. So okay, I think if you don't mind some of my very student like questions, let's start somewhere. Now you began with the gendered thing, so can we articulate certain gendered NVCs that both the candidates have exhibited? Now I do not want my question to lead you directly into politics unless you want to go there, but I suppose what I'm asking is, are there different expectations of NVCs from a male candidate and from a female candidate when both these people are running for the same post? Now, that might seem like a rhetorical question, but I suppose what I'm asking is, how are the expectations evaluated by the people who have these expectations? Because that evaluation then has a direct impact on the election results as well, right? So is there a gendered way that NVCs are articulated and expected to be articulated?
Okay, that's a very interesting point, Professor Chatterjee. First of all, we're seeing a woman on the one side and a man on the other side. Expectations are so clear from the get go that here's an alpha male. And of course, we don't see Kamala lagging behind it at the same time because she is the flag bearer of the other party, of the party that is very much attuned to the progress of America and all that, in opposition to the Maga campaign, which is Make America Great Again. For sure, we're saying that Kamala, too, is trying to be in the same trajectory. But let me just conceptually do this analysis by referring to her stance during the recent speech she did to concede to the election results. Okay, a lot of people are having conversations on how she performed behind the podium. Very poignantly, she stressed on the idea for the American people to be very, very true to the creed of, you know, helping the country progress. At the same time, you can see on the sidelines how she sharply conveyed the idea that while she conceded to, of course, her opponent, there is the fire that continues to a burn from within, that she's not done with what she's trying to do for the American public. And with this, you can see a lot of NBCs. For example, there was one who highlighted how she did this multiple times. The right hand being moved to emphasize the kind of point she's trying to make. And for some Americans, this is the kind of gesture you're seeing in televangelists. They're trying to compare that to these televangelizing people who seem to be very didactic. See, when you do this, you want to go consistent with how the brain tries to convey these sharp thoughts about staying true, supporting the current president while not forgetting what the Democrats are also upholding as another party. This didactic mood and didactic aura of Kamala doing that, for example, sends a very strong signal. Being a woman, being a mom, being somebody who sort of understands what a family should be, how to rear a family, how to cultivate this relationship within the family, is very much seen there. Well, on the other hand, when Trump did his declaration, because of course he won the presidency, congratulations to him, we are seeing, despite being tired, he remained to be the alpha guy behind the podium. And usually they did this. They locked their hands on the edge of the podium, signaling that, okay, that is a good start to thank the American people, while ensuring that he is so balanced in his demeanor while addressing the people. And this shows, these two hands on the edge of the podium, flat on the podium, delivering how thankful he is for everything that they've done to help him do the campaign very successfully. While doing that, you are not seeing a Trump who is shrugging his shoulder despite it's being tired. You're seeing him always affirming. The voice is so clear with what he wants to convey. He is massively thankful. And there are a lot of people on his side standing next to him, also resonating with a kind of strength and agility that after months and months of campaigning, everything went well, and thanks to their collective effort, right? That alone shows a lot of gendered motives between the male and the female candidates. We're not trying to say that there is a female expectation from a female candidate, although we can say that partially, yes, that could be some ideas coming from people who are accustomed to the gestures of women. But in the American politics, we can say that, either male or female, whatever gesture you give, so long as you have the gesture of authenticity, and so long as the kind of gesture you choose for this particular campaign suits very well your vision, I think it's good to go. And you're getting what you're trying to achieve at the end of the day. In the case of Kamala, she never got what she wanted, but in terms of conveying what she wanted with those NBCs, I thought that she nailed it because that's her stance. And for her, that's her way of conveying her most authentic self. Similarly, Trump cannot back down, and in terms of the NBCs, he's very consistent. Since his first term until now, he has never backed down, and he's consistently been doing the alpha gesture, looming over someone. For example, in the case of the Hillary Clinton incident, when he was looming over her and invading her privacy, or be it the very firm clasp he did with Macron, or the clasping, the grip he did with PM Modi, for example. All these belong to Trump's skill sets in conveying his most authentic self, Professor Chatterjee.
So, Dr. Magan, we are veering away from Indian and Filipino territories into American territory, but as you know, our Indian viewers would be very interested to hear from you if you have anything to contribute regarding the Trump PM Modi non-verbal cues camaraderie, because there have been a few. Anyway, I have a couple of different questions at the moment, but you can pitch in anytime you like on that score, because I'm told it's also good for the algorithms. Nevertheless, you raised certain very important points. First of all, I'm a bit relieved to hear the word alpha from you, because it sounds more like a colloquialism. So a serious theorist, public intellectual like yourself, talk using the that word, words like alpha, beta, etc. It's a bit of a nice exception, because one nowadays never knows what the academia likes and does not like, or what society is thinking. But I suppose we are trying to explore exactly those questions. Now you mentioned Trump has certain characteristic signals, or a characteristic persona which he has to meet through his signals. Now, something that I have noticed Trump do is, use his the tip of his thumb and his index finger, and try and write imaginary sentences, especially when he's talking to journalists. And I think the reception of that nonverbal cue, whatever it stands for, is mixed, because Trump has his perception. There has been a lot of perception management this time in the media, and I don't explicitly intend to go into any of the political or personal aspects of his life. But surely this NVC does not stand for some universal signification. But in your understanding, consistent with Trump's image and his persona, what do you think this stands for? I've noticed him do that, especially when he's a little agitated, or maybe sometimes feeling a bit passionate. And Trump has this very uh, amusing or idiosyncratic way of talking sometimes when he speaks in fragments. We all do that, but he's a leader at the highest stage of politics in the world. So his doing that sends out a different kind of signal altogether. So I suppose, would it be possible for you to throw some light on his hand gestures and everything else?
Okay, that's a very clear observation of Trump's very colorful presence on stage, being the world's most popular person. Right. Like I said before, NVCs could vary from one culture to another. We can assign several meanings to just one sign because, again, we are different in many ways. For example, this one, as you mentioned, this can mean okay, for many people. But again, because we're talking about Trump, there should be something very, very specific to this. And it's not just a simple okay that we generate, right? Being very generic an idea. We have to know his background. We know who he is. He is very much accustomed to the Wall Street practices, and he's a businessman. He has Trump Tower, and he has the gilded sort of establishments in New York City. I've seen one, strolling down. I saw this Trump Tower, and looking up, I was thinking, okay, really, he is really moneyed and all that. So when he does this, well, a lot of observers would say that this is very much going in the direction of the money idea, or okay, the idea that he is a rich person, he is accustomed to doing this, as if to signal that, okay, it's always money all the time that we are doing, making America great again. But in your question, you were implying that, okay, perhaps this could mean something else, like when he's agitated. So to deepen that observation, yes, we're saying that not just Trump, but many people would actually do this when they want to emphasize something, a minute idea, for example, to be really understood by the people he is conveying the idea to. You see, when you try to pinch, the forefinger and this thumb, you're trying to zero in on something. It's as if you're saying, okay, this is the minutest idea. See, to exaggerate things, minutest. Just to neologize things. This is the tiniest of all. And he is hoping, being the speaker, that the one listening to him could really understand and can picture the idea in the most clearest way. And even that is very redundant, most clearest. Okay. That is just to naturalize the mood of the person saying that he wants this to be understood so clearly. Whatever happens to this along the way, even if it does not mean like what we're thinking, still it conveys that generic response from the people that, they clap their hands and they laud him, they appreciate him, they voted. In fact, they voted Trump to be the president because perhaps these NBCs he has been given to these people really went well with their understanding of what this should mean or what this could mean, as a form of emphasizing these ideas that now he is the president who survived that assassination attempt. This is the kind of resonance we are getting once we're seeing this image, because it's not really that as he did it. It's like this. There's this pinching image. If you see it, if you zoom it out, there's the pinching image, not this, as if it's circular. No, it's not so circular, but it's like this. So it's like you're zeroing in on something and you have to understand it, whatever happens. If you are pro him, wonderful. If you are against him, well, it's high time that you understand what this means in its most simple version. Is into the simple version, by the way.
You spoke quite nicely, rather, I should say. In fact, you spoke with great deal of empathy when you spoke about Kamala Harris, because you spoke in some good detail prior to talking about Trump. So let me bring you back to Harris. Now, again, I think I'm not 100% sure of the observation that I have. So you can review my observation, but I've noticed that at least of late, and this is slightly before the election results. I'm not sure if I've studied her very keenly after the election results, but she has a very specific way of nodding, and I think to a large part that nodding, very sincere way of nodding, while especially when she is delivering speeches, when she is talking, it's like her voice and her nodding is coordinated, and that signals a great deal of passion and sincerity on the surface. Have you noticed anything of that sort? I am also reminded of a lot of my students, so first year, second year, third, fourth year students, and Dr. Magan, you are aware that I happen to teach also quite a few law students. So, especially when law students are preparing their cases, they have moot courts. I've observed a lot of them do that. Now, I haven't really thought of it in a gendered way until now. So, I suppose what I'm asking is, do you think my observation has any value? Do you think it is in any way correlated to the election and the election results we saw? And do you think it has any kind of relationship with the question of gendered expectations that we were talking about?
Or first of all, you're speaking from your observation, and no one can really discredit that because that's what you saw. And these students under your charge are basically soon to be lawyers. They're for sure the alpha of their generation, right? Because they have to be convincing at court when they defend cases. They should be showing some high level of persuasion so that they can win the case. So that cannot be really seen as a gendered one. In fact, that is expected of them being lawyers. So this profession they're having is basically the one mandating these particular tones and gestures because they'd be successful if they do these things in the most appropriate way. whether or not we can link this observation you had with the recent observations we're having with Kamala and Trump, for example, I think we are, or we can say that the answer is yes. Well, why? Because the common ground here is politics. And you say lawyering is about what? About regulating the thought processes of people and how things can be won over from something. Litigation is the common ground here. Kamala and Trump are in the same direction as well. When they do their speeches, they in a way do the natural litigation of something. It's like a big or a global court, and that Trump, for example, and Kamala are the ones defending, their causes. And so doing such would entail, these generic ideas of what? Of not just verbalizing things, but also being careful with what NVCs they're putting out there. Because at the end of the day, for lawyers and for politicians, they understand very clearly that it's about how they say it. It's about what outcomes are they getting from something. It's about whether or not there's a positive response at the end of the day. So for you to be hopeful that there's a positive response, well, you can do anything you have to do, just not go overboard, because again, people can read how being overboard could mean like you're being exhausted, or beyond exhausted, you are frustrated. You cannot be showing that. So there's still decorum in that. And that's the expectation that your profession has, imposed on that particular person.
Um, I think there is scope for people correlating words or phrases or certain kinds of thoughts definitely with an ideological position. But is there scope to correlate body language, non-verbal cues, with ideological positions? In other words, so to elaborate, what I'm actually wanting to ask is, suppose somebody explicitly does not want to be like Donald Trump, who is a Republican candidate and now president of America for the second time, president elect for the second time. Or if somebody wishes to be like Donald Trump, uh, and vice versa, somebody who does not want to be of the ideological persuasion as Vice President Kamala Harris, or somebody wishes to go down her ideological road. So, for people like those, is there a way that we can, just as we try and understand, try and sometimes maybe even emulate or try and adapt to people's thoughts or language, can we also do the same thing with nonverbal cues? Is there a direct relationship between ideology and nonverbal cues, do you think?
Well, yes and no. I'll have to emulate what you always say. There's always a yes and no there, because there's no way that we can argue on a full negative case or argue on a full positive case, because ideology would have to always train your thought, train your mindset. And if you think that this ideology is worth investing in, then of course everything else follows. It's about whether or not you want things to be changed in you deliberately. At the end of the day, Professor Chatterjee, it's about your choice. So if you think that this type of ideology is so welcome in your system and that you can adapt to it, why not? If it gives you the best outcomes in life, especially if you're, say, a lawyer or a politician. If your PR says, you have to do this because this is good for the public, and this is good for you towards the public, I mean, you have no recourse but to say yes, of course, right? Even if your body doesn't really respond to it originally. Because at the end of the day, if you say, okay, I'll take this as an example. We have the wife of JD Vance, and she's American Indian, and I heard her interview earlier that she never even dreamed to be in the position right now, because she's just a very simple individual. But we know that she's a lawyer as well. She's a Yale graduate, and she did things marvelously before coming into the political stage. So taking that as an example, she is a very very classic example of a woman who is very demure and not so much like Kamala when she did this, because when she introduced JD Vance, for example, during the campaign, she was too soft spoken, not much of NVCs there. She was just standing still, and she used her very soft voice to really convince the public that, what, her husband is somebody whom they can trust. And when she uttered the words like, "Thank you for placing your trust in our family," when she did that, it was so so wonderfully done that even without NBCs, her tone did it all. Her tone, another category of or another element to look into when we talk about NBCs, is just so powerfully done. And I thought that she was being prepped by the campaign manager as to how she'd do it, just to really nail the whole speech. So let's just hypothesize that perhaps it's not the real characteristic of the wife of JD, Usha, right? That's the name of Usha. What if she's not like that? But because she has to be launched to the global stage, she really has to follow whatever the campaign manager is telling her, because again, that's good for the campaign of the husband, and generally that's good for the campaign of Trump in general. So either way, Professor Chatterjee, whether or not ideology influences your NBCs, or whether or not NBCs originally need not be influenced by the ideology, it doesn't matter, because what we are trying to say here, and what we're trying to see in the long run, for example, is the sustainability of the administration, that there are no mishaps or whatever, so long as you follow the protocol, so long as you don't become very very how do you call that, radical in your expressions, coupled with radical gestures, I mean, that would be fine, and that would be the sure win strategy for, say, the Trump Vance partnership in the next 4 years. So I thought that, that's how we analyze things in relation to your question.
Do you have any kind of insight into how theorists or analysts of nonverbal cues are deploying their ideas, their knowledge in the intelligence agencies, in FBI, CIA, for example? Have you ever had a chance to give that a thought?
Yes, I have been hearing some of their comments as well, and these very glaring gestures coming from Trump and coming from Kamala, being two of the world's most popular individuals. That's the same narrative we are hearing from them. That there's this gesture of despondency. There's this, say, in the Kamala side, there's this gesture of being happy of what the results are, but at the same time not happy because there were furrowed brows. And I particularly say this. One expert said that in the entire speech, the furrowed brows always appear, if not always, frequently appear, and they seem to signal that while she accepted it, she is in a way not done with her own vision. Perhaps she's going to run still in the next few years, because the voice of resignation there doesn't really mean that she totally glorifies Trump or whatever. It just means that for now she has to take some time to realize whatever happened, why she never won, and what could be done to bounce back, hopefully in the coming years.
Okay, so before I move into the last question, I mean, you are an intellectual, Dr. Rhodora Magan. You have I mean, needless to say, you are very passionate about writing, uh, uh, just as we both are. And I think writing is a world that keeps on conjuring new ideas, for intellectual activity, be it in a short article, a work of prose, a work of fiction, maybe a book. So I'm just framing a different question in rather in rather, let's say, simplistic terms. Suppose somebody wishes to write a book on the American elections. Can one conceive of a book according to you? Now, I'm not quizzing you on whether you have all the data regarding all the NVCs that can possibly be observed, but just a thought. Is it possible, do you think, to tell the tale of American elections, or indeed any other election results of big democracies such as South Asian nations? India is a big example where NVCs do get discussed, but people like me who do not have adequate knowledge as much as you do, and you are the expert on NVCs, so you must enlighten us. That can are we entering an age, an era where we will see more discussions on this an NVC, or that NVC, or the constant sincere nodding type of NVC? Can these election sagas be told through the language of NVCs, according to you?
For sure. I mean, because of technology, people have become very, very sensitized to the tiniest of details in whatever they see on television, in these podcasts, and even the tools of zooming in certain details. Say when Melania and Trump, for example, just landed in, I forgot the airport, but there was a very clear grasp coming from the netizens that they were not in good terms because one hand was never. Held by Melania, or was it Trump? I forgot, but yeah, there was this clear sense of what they're trying to see in these images on YouTube, and because people have been very much empowered to say their piece as well, say in a podcast or in a review of a certain event, then for sure they can very well translate this into writing whatever is the American decision that transpired in the past couple of hours regarding the Americans' way of voting or the Americans' way of thinking their future, with Trump being at the center, for example. There is no end to the speculation whether or not we can do this in a book, whether or not we can do this in a, or not even a book, but do it digitally, because that's what people do these days. They continue to kill the print media because they think that it's very easy doing it digitally, and that information can be spread so fast using the digital platform. So yes, this saga can be told and retold a million times over, any in any way they like, in whatever platform they can choose, just to say their piece. Because again, there are wonderful things to find out in the tiniest of details, not just in the way Trump held Modi's hand, for example, and not just in the way Modi did this. I heard and I learned that this is steepling. When a man does this in between his legs, when he's meeting a foreign dignitary, for example, he is steepling, and Trump is found to be always doing this. Say when there was the meeting he had with Obama, he did the steeple, and the higher the steeple, it means the higher the intimidation. But during that meeting he did with Obama, we know for sure they're not in good terms, right? They're in both camps. So he did the steeple in between his legs as he sat with Obama, and it was just right there. So it means respect. And the same steeple can be seen in Modi's, or in that video with Modi and Trump, when Modi was meeting with Trump sometime in the past. Modi did the same thing, the steeple in between his legs. And it was not high steeple, but a steeple down there. That means, okay, respect for the POTUS, or the President of the United States of America. So, these things can be amplified further by various individuals who are keen on these things, because we know exactly that conversation is so rich a topic, and it's a very overarching theme that can be dissected a million times over. So why not?
Right, right. That's extremely interesting, and I think that calls for a completely different episode altogether. And maybe I think NVCs are leading us into um, interesting waters. I hope they are not uh, anything else but interesting. I suppose while we could go on and on, maybe we'll end it here with some final comments from you, Dr. Magan, because I think there's a clear sense from what you have said so far that while clearly the US elections, or indeed any election narrative, that grand narrative could be broken down to critical fragments of non-verbal cues. I think it's also very important for us to learn from you, Dr. Magan, about certain predictive aspects of NVC. So, what kind of message can we as educators, as pedagogues, transmit to our students for them not to be simply good students as it were, but also to be good global citizens, not merely in terms of how to sit in the class, how to conduct classroom activity, how to perform well in the examinations, but in a large overarching sense, because today's students will be tomorrow's educators. So in that regard, what can universities of today, what can classrooms of today learn about NVCs? Surely there's lots to, but any advice you would like to provide?
I would say that that is a brilliant question, because time and again, I've always been telling my students that whatever you do, whether or not you decide to couple your your verbal ideas with NVCs, the most important thing there is you connect with the people you're sharing ideas with, and you don't isolate them. So in that sense, if we prefer, to couple these ideas with NVCs because we can't stop our bodies from doing these NVCs at the end of the day, then it's better for us to really understand what NVCs are going to help build relationships and not those NVCs that, that destroy relationships. So I have always been telling my students that, the idea of giving warmth to the person you're talking to is already enough to make him feel included in the conversation. Say you're talking to a stranger, a complete stranger. What NVC is very universal, so that he would feel the same feeling towards you, that he or she is never isolated. I think the idea of smiling is always universal, but not too much, just to make sure that he is understood and he is also loved in a very appropriate way. What else? Beyond smile, there's this very, very unwritten law about making your, say, your seatmate on a train, for example, feel that you're not so arrogant and all that. Uh, by looking at the person, conveying the idea whether or not he's comfortable in that particular side of the train. Because if that's the case, if you can sense something from the face that he's not comfortable, for example, then you can switch places, right? And you see, there are no words there, but the universal language there is that you are very sensible enough to understand what is needed to be done at a particular circumstance. Say there's a lady standing and you thought that he is way older than you. No words are needed, by the way, but just okay, gesturing to the woman that you want her to take your place. That's enough, to make this universal ideology of NBCs more sustained, especially in the universities where there should be a good relationship between professors and students, a kind of relationship that should never ever be abused, but the kind of relationship that should be taken care of very importantly, because we have to move on together to the next phase of life with a clear head, with a clear vision that they have to graduate and they have to be part of the workforce, to become a productive member of society. Professor Chatterjee, I think that's the most beautiful vision that we're having for NBCs, and that there's no way for anyone to isolate anyone up there by a very cold stare, because that is so, so clear that there's no way for that person to include you in whatever plan in the future. That cold stare is universal also, that you're so, so individualistic and not collectivist for that matter.
That's again remarkable. I'm tempted to ask one last question. I
Sure,
wonder
go
if
ahead. Sure, go ahead.
NVCs can be weaponized. I mean, you don't need to answer that, but since you brought up the issue of NVCs, which are actually a tool of nurture. They are a tool of caring for people. They are a tool of nourishing not merely the souls outside, but also the soul within. Because sometimes we all forget that my NVC is not merely a signal to the person looking at it. It's actually a gesture to that intermediary bond, that very fleeting, momentary bond that that person and I have constructed. Fortuitously, we don't even have entire autonomy, and maybe to believers, it's a God-gifted moment. To people, to scientific materialists, maybe it's a moment of some kind of a of with some kind of mysterious ontology. Uh, Anyhow, is there a way that NVCs can get weaponized? And I suppose my very, very last question could be: can they also be, used to not weaponize society, but to make it more compassionate?
Absolutely. Again, it boils down to the choice of the person who seeks for building bridges and not burning bridges. Weaponizing them would mean you have an intent. Okay, you have the goal. If you weaponize it for destruction, okay, that's your call. If you weaponize it for the flourishing of culture, again, that's your call. I could recall, during the presidential debate, Kamala did this. She propped her elbow and did this to support her face, because in a way she was never liking the idea of Trump at all, and more importantly, she was weaponizing that gesture to intimidate the alpha male next to her, because for sure he understands very well that she's lagging behind in the competition because she's a female. And like I said to you earlier, males are expecting Trump to be the alpha, and females too are doing the same thing, expecting for Kamala not to be defeated by that. So in a way, she was collectively carrying their voices through the gesture that she did during the presidential debate. And when you do this, it's like, okay, come on, I'm listening to you, but you're wrong, something like that, right? In a way, you're mocking the idea of the person while you're doing this. So that's one way of weaponizing the kind of intent, and that intent is to demoralize the person you're doing that to. Or if you don't want to do that because you respect the person, of course, it's another way of weaponizing your own gesture by not showing it if you think that that can destroy the person while he or she is uttering his ideas. So at the end of the day, say when these presidents are meeting, say for the G7 summit or G20 summit, they usually do the handshake. Trump is so famously branded as the one with the hard grip, right? And Macron followed suit eventually. Even PM Modi followed suit. So they thought that this type of gesture really seals the deal. And it's like if you do it with a firm grip, it's like telling, the people watching, the whole world watching, that, your country and my country are going to be in good terms for the next 4 years, for example. And that translates to productivity, more jobs, and security and all that. No undocumented migrants whatsoever, as the Trump team would always convey to the public. Um, so yes, the yes and no once again, Professor Chatterjee. Weaponize it for a good cause. Don't weaponize it for a good cause if that's what you think. If you're too individualistic and all that.
Well, Dr. Magan, it will not be any exaggeration to say that we could go on, not merely because the subject is so interesting, but because your intellectual company is highly beneficial for our listeners. It's ennobling on multiple levels. There are aspects of life that I may or may not know too much about, but I think it is these conversations that I hope do not make the listener in any way feel excluded, because that's what been the experience for me, at least for the last 40 plus minutes, or rather 45 minutes plus. I've had a very wonderful time, and I think it's made me a little more conscious of my NVCs, because I was thinking, what would Sheldon Cooper say? Sheldon Cooper from, although I'm not a watcher of that show, but I think it's
Big
that
Bang.
Big Bang Theory. Yes, I was just see. I That's the evidence that I haven't ever watched it, but my students do. And Sheldon Cooper doesn't have NVCs. Does that mean he has no emotions? But maybe that's a question for another episode, Dr. Magan.
Exactly.
Um, what a wonderful intellectual joyride it has been today. Dr. Magan, I think we have come to that part of the show where we need your support to canvas for support for bilateral view. So why don't I give it over to you?
Okay. Again, your ideas were equally compelling, Professor Chatterjee. Praise God for this episode today that we're having. So yes, our dear viewers, please, if you are finding some value in this episode we're giving you, please do like and share, and please do comment as well. We want to know your thoughts about NVCs and whether or not there's a way for you to say that Sheldon Cooper indeed has no emotions simply because he has no NVCs. But for sure, you defend him and say he has emotions, right? But he is just simply not the type of person who is doing it very excessively. There are tiny, gestures there, here and there, but he's not very excessive with it, unlike us. And that's the reason why, Professor Chatterjee, I'm also very conscious of my own NVCs from the start of this episode, because I do the flipping of the hair always because it covers my face. But I'm very particular that it means something in a particular culture. But in this context, I'm just trying to say that I want to do it because I want to uncover my face from the kind of, mess that the hair creates. So, yeah, that's it. I hope our viewers will support us all the way through.
Exactly. That is exactly something that I had wanted to bring up in relation to one of the um, uh, candidates running for president, but I did not, because I was under the impression that it may not be appropriate for me to speak about a president elect or a vice president. But I'm very glad that you brought it up. Although we have clearly run out of time for today's episode, but I'm sure we can bring that up for discussion, because that's a remarkable point of how certain things may not actually be explicitly engineered to signal the impressions that they are signaling, but certain things
Yeah.
can't be helped anyhow, and but we make do with what we have. Dr. Magan, thank you so much. I think our viewers are going to support us, but still we have to hope that they count on our words. They listen to each and every word that we speak. I hope with time they will be able to understand our sincerity. Viewers, please, please, please like, share, subscribe, and do comment. I am pleased to say that we are beginning to see that time when when our viewers are engaging very minutely with our shows. I hope that time never arrives, that we aren't able to engage with all the comments. Uh, uh, Either the comments will become too voluminous, or there might be comments with which we don't know how to engage, because we really don't know which books or which podcast they are viewing before commenting on ours. But I hope that time never comes. I sincerely hope, viewers, that you found lots of things valuable in today's conversation, and that you've been hearing our previous podcasts with the same intensity that you will view the future episodes. Thank you so much for staying with Bilateral View, and thank you so much for making Bilateral View become what it is becoming. This is Arup K. Chatterjee, and with me is my co host.
Again, I'm Rhodora Magan, and because I'm a Cebuana, I would say maayong gabi natong tanan. Daghan kaayong salamat sa pagpaminaw. Professor Chatterjee, say it in your most beautiful language.
Thank you, Dr. Rhodora Magan. Wishing you a very, very pleasant evening, and wishing all our viewers a very warm namaste from India.
Bye bye. Have a great day.
Ciao.